Good morning, I'm Roland Martin. Next on News 1 Now. Has Donald Trump opened himself up to being impeached? He asked, according to FBI Director James Comey, according to a memo, asked him to stand down with an investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. This has lit Democrats up, and also Republicans are even saying they want to see those memos from James Comey. We'll talk with Congresswoman Karen Bass, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, also legal analysts, and also our panel to break down what is next. Us operating folks right now in a constitutional crisis. Also on the show, we'll give you details about the officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who is on trial for killing Terrence Crutcher. She took the stand on yesterday. We'll give you the details of that particular case as well. Also on the show, folks, the Justice Department opens an investigation into a Texas police officer's fatal shooting of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards. Also giving the latest that case as well. 63 years since Brownburg's Board of Education, and we still continue to have segregated schools. What is being done to change that in America? It's time to bring the funk on News 1 Now, TV 1. Explosive allegations, folks, this morning dealing with President Donald Trump. Another day of madness in the Oval Office. The New York Times reported that former FBI Director James Comey kept detailed memos showing that Trump asked him to stop an investigation into Michael Flynn one day after he was fired as Trump's national security advisor. This took place on February 14th, when Comey attended a terrorism threat briefing at the White House. When that meeting was over, Donald Trump asked to speak with him privately. Other people in that meeting included Department of Justice Attorney General, guess what? Jeff Sessions. According to notes Comey wrote documenting their conversation, Trump said, quote, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Comey responded, "I agree, he is a good guy." Now, the White House denies that conversation, issuing this statement: "The president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn. The president has the utmost respect for our law enforcement agencies and all investigations. This is not a truthful or accurate portrayal of the conversation between the president and Mr. Comey." Now, keep in mind, folks, yesterday, the normal White House daily briefing did not take place on camera. This, of course, was after the whole issue of whether or not Trump revealed sensitive information to Russia. This story then dropped later. This story dropped later in the day. Now, again, Comey is known to keep very detailed notes of any conversation that he has with the president. According to sources to the New York Times, it's also been corroborated by the Washington Post and others. There are other memos as well. Lots of questions for us to get to. Let's get right to it. Let's go to Congresswoman Karen Bass, of course, California. She sits on the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman, I want to start with you before I go to the rest of my panel here, before I also go to Chris Metzler, President, CEO, Chief Innovator of JMI Group, also Republican strategist. Congresswoman, when you hear these details, when you hear that Comey kept detailed memos, does this rise to obstruction of justice by President Trump?
Well, you know, I certainly don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but what I can tell you, though, is that this is, I think, probably the most dramatic revelation that has happened so far. I mean, it's hard to believe, Roland, that he hasn't even completed 4 months of his presidency, and all of it seems to be just falling apart. This is just days after, you know, him firing Comey. So I really do believe that if Comey has kept the detailed notes the way everybody says he has, then I wouldn't be surprised if we're not looking at the beginning of the end.
You sit on the Judiciary Committee in the House, and obviously you're going to have significant hearings. And so the question is it time for James Comey to testify publicly so everyone can hear his answers to these critical questions?
I absolutely believe it's time. I hope that happens very soon. But I also think that you're beginning to see a crack with the Republicans. So, for example, on the other committee, the Government Reform Committee, Chairman Chafis has said that he is willing and ready to subpoena if necessary. So this is really putting my Republican colleagues back against the wall, and they're going to have to make a decision. You know, how long are they going to stand by him? And I think it's going to be a question for his base as well. You know, clearly, healthcare reform is one of the most significant things that has happened with Trump Care that was passed just a few weeks ago. Nobody's even talking about that right now because there has been so much chaos in the last couple of weeks. So I'm hoping that he comes before the Judiciary Committee, the Government Reform Committee, and the Intelligence Committees. I think that we'll be seeing a lot from former Director Comey.
You made the point about what Congressman Chafin said. He's made it clear he wants to see those memos and is giving them a week. You also have Senator Lindsey Graham on the Republican side across the in the other chamber also calling for these hearings. It is clear that the American public needs more answers. Again, this is coming on the heels of Trump providing sensitive information to the Russians that came from Israel. I mean, this seems to be a White House that is imploding.
And you know, I mean, he's getting ready to leave the country, and I think we're all going to have to brace ourselves for that because I can't imagine what embarrassment is going to happen, you know, over the next week. But I do think it's going to be really important to keep our eyes on Jason Chaffetz because he is not running for re-election. So, you know, he doesn't have a lot to lose, and I think a lot of people are speculating maybe he wants to run for governor. So he could certainly use this to his political benefit, but I'm hoping rather than an opportunistic view of it, that he will actually have the courage to step forward and to challenge what's going on.
You made a point about where Democrats stand. Senator Patrick Leahy, of course, he has made it clear that Republicans should put country over party. Here's what he had to say. All right, so I'll actually get that soundbite ready there. Congressman, again, Congresswoman, last point here. Trump is leaving for this foreign trip. Should these hearings start the day he gets back?
I absolutely think they should start the day he gets back. However, you know, I don't think there's any reason to wait for Comey. I mean, I think he can be, you know, out of the country for this to happen. I know that, you know, there is a tradition when the president's out of the country that things, you know, be calm here. But this is such a critical situation in our country. And I just have to tell you, Roland, in my district, you know, people are just paralyzed with fear. They're very much afraid of this president.
Right.
I have town hall meetings that normally were 200-300 people. I have 500, 800 people turning out, all expressing their fear and panic with him. And so I don't know that we can wait for him to get back for us to hear from Comey.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, hold tight 1 second. Let's go to Chris Metchler. I want to get your thoughts. Clearly a serious problem here for President Trump in this White House.
Yeah, it is a serious problem, but let's look at a couple of things. From the standpoint of obstruction of justice, at this point, the evidence is not sufficient to prove that there was obstruction of justice. Here's what's going to have to happen. What's going to have to happen in this particular case is it's going to be Trump's word against Comey's word. That's essentially what you're going to have. So at this point, I know people are talking about impeachment for obstruction of justice. The evidence at this point simply is not there.
Let's go to legal analyst Monique Presley, attorney with the Presley firm here in D.C. Monique, your assessment as a lawyer about whether or not President Trump has obstructed justice by asking Comey not to stop the investigation into Mike Flynn.
The relevant provisions under the U.S. Code, we're looking at 18 U.S.C. 73, and there are a couple of different sections, 1502, 1503. I would agree that we're not there yet where what people normally think of as obstruction is concerned, where there's been active bribery or there has been success at preventing something from happening, but that's not the only provision. There's a provision that deals with what you would think of as undue influence by a supervisor. And what supervisor could there be bigger than the President of the United States? And it actually provides that where the supervising authority corruptly or by threats or by force or by any threatening letter or communication endeavors to influence, intimidate, or impede any officer in any court of the United States or officer who may be serving for examination or investigation of a criminal proceeding, that is also considered obstruction. And that is exactly what we're dealing with here. Now, yes, we could use more evidence of it, but it seems pretty obvious if the words that are in the Comey letter are true, that this president did attempt to use his position to influence the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And I think that is something that we're going to hear more and more, not just Democrats, but Republicans say needs to be addressed by way of hearing.
Spencer Overton, president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. This is clearly a crisis for the Republican Party and one that they have to confront because, look, you got midterm elections next year. His approval ratings around 36, 39%. Right. You keep having these hits. You're not having any discussion about tax reform, about health care, right, about infrastructure. Right. It's all about his own self-inflicted wounds.
No, that's right. And so part of it is political, right? Part of it is the legislative process, right? But also getting back to this obstruction piece, it's not just obstruction to try to influence and talk and say, hey, cool out on Mike Flynn. But then after that, to let the FBI director go, that certainly interferes with an investigation.
And he stipulates in the interview with Lester Holt that he did so as a result of the Russian investigation.
That was part of his thinking on this. He acknowledged it. It's from his mouth.
Greg Carr, I want to go to you as well. When you talk about this battle moving forward, the White House issues a denial, but everyone is running for cover. Even Fox News last night couldn't find Republicans to come on the air to defend Donald Trump. That says a lot.
It does. And as Spencer said, this is really political. The Republicans have to gauge how much more of Trump they can stand because Trump's worst enemy is Trump. They can't take his Twitter. Even H.R. McMaster, who he's beefing with by all accounts, got on TV yesterday and said he didn't know where that information came from. Everybody's withdrawing from Trump, but Mitch McConnell's only interest in this, and Paul Ryan, is can they hold him together long enough to get their agenda? McConnell admitted as much on television. So really, they don't care about Trump as long as they can get their agenda forward. And finally, we look at health care, for example. Rep. Bass brought that up. You've got several Democrats, Joe Manchin and several others, who are now talking to moderate Republicans in the Senate. This whole thing might come apart. And their concern is, can they get something to this man's desk so he can sign it before he implodes?
Sue Zoldak, you're a Republican. You deal with communications. Trump believes he has a communication strategy. No, he has a lying strategy.
Yeah, well, his strategy has always been, founded on the power that he has by speaking words, and he's come from a world where whatever he says happens and goes, and this is clearly obviously a very different world that he lives in. I think the important thing for both parties is to get through whatever hearings that you have to do, I think, as quickly as possible. I think the public is tired of years and years of investigations of Benghazi, of emails, or whatever it is, and get to the heart of making
Republican
policy.
Hearings.
No,
years and years.
That's what I'm saying.
When you actually think about years and years of hearings, typically you would think about, Republican hearings during President Bill Clinton, the Benghazi hearings. So Democrats have not actually had these years and years of hearings.
I don't know about that, but
show me the evidence.
I don't know about that.
Hold on.
I think there's blame on both sides.
No. When you say long hearings, show me the example where Democrats have had long hearings like Republicans. I'll wait.
I don't want to make this conversation about Hillary. No. I think that she extended her own investigation many times.
Stop. She extended what investigation?
The email server investigation.
No. That wasn't hers. That was a Republican investigation. So again,
but she could have ended it much quicker.
Well, first of all, Sue, one of the reasons we no longer have the independent counsel is because of what Republicans did with Kenneth Starr, and Democrats got rid of it because it was abused. So please, let's just be real honest with that. Congressman Bass, I got to go to a break in about 40 seconds. Final comment from you.
Well, when you talk about the president's words versus Comey's words, one thing that we have seen from this president is that he's a pathological liar. And you have hours and hours of tapes of him completely contradicting himself over and over again, it doesn't seem as though he has any control. So I think when all is said and done, if you're going to put Comey's memos next to Trump's tapes, I think Comey's going to come out the winner.
Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, we truly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank
Monique,
you.
Chris Metzler, Spencer, Kim, Greg, LaDon, hold tight 1 second. We'll get back to all of you. When we come back, we'll hear from Auntie Maxine. Congresswoman Maxine Waters will weigh in the simulcast on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. I'm sure she's got something to say about Donald Trump. 15 after the hour, News 1 Now, TV 1.